Hey, well, hi everybody. Welcome to today's presentation on auditing Worksets with Ideate Explorer. My name is Sash Kazaminajad, and I will be presenting here for the next 30 minutes or so on how to audit our Worksets. So just a little bit about me. I am the Customer Success Manager with Ideate Software. And I'm located in our Portland, Oregon office. So my background is in architecture, and I have been now with Ideate for over 6 years. And so a big portion of my focus is on the Revit software platform, and of course the software development that we do for Ideate software. Okay, and of course, why are we here? And why does Ideate software exist? Well, we're here to help you simplify your Revit data challenges. So again, we have a collection of 5 tools that really allow you to say goodbye to your laborious data editing tasks and also reviewing and management tasks as well. And again, appreciate everybody taking some time out of their day today to join me. We're going to show you how to use Ideate Explorer to help you be more efficient with auditing your work sets. Another thing I just want to point out to you, if you have any questions at any point in time, feel free to type them in the question panel. I will be looking at the question panel about halfway through the presentation and then also at the end. Again, we only have 30 minutes here, and I'm going to show you some quick tidbits, and this way you can get to auditing your work sets as soon as we're done with this presentation. Okay, so today's focus will be on the Ideate Explorer platform. All right, so Ideate Explorer allows you to audit your BIM models with certainty. So we're all about data discovery and data editing, right? And so the nice thing about Ideate Explorer is we have really lightning fast Revit data discovery and also manipulation. One of the things I do like to say about the Ideate Explorer platform is that it really is a true model browser. So for those of you that are actively using Ideate Explorer, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about here. We're about showing you the content that is in your Revit model. And we get down to a very granular level. Not only do we show you the items that are currently in your project, we can even do some deeper dive and get some more information about those elements that you have selected. The Revit project browser is kind of seen in this image over here, really doesn't give you that kind of detailed information. It's really at a very high level. Ideate Explorer allows you to really dig down, as I mentioned before. One of my favorite features within the Ideate Explorer platform, and I'm actually going to be spending a little bit of time in this particular component of Explorer, is Ideate Query. So as I mentioned before, Ideate Explorer allows you to find your instances of elements that are in your model. You can double click and select those elements. But what if you need some more information about that selection? Certainly you can try to schedule some of this information in a Revit schedule, but unfortunately Revit schedules are very limited in the amount of data and the type of data that it shows you. And there's a lot of information that it just will never show you. Well, that's where query can really come in. I can take a selection of elements and say, hey, I need to know about maybe their in-place usage, or are these elements pinned? Or maybe I want to know of the selection of elements, tell me what elements are on certain levels. That's where query can come in handy. And we're going to be using query as part of our workset audit process today. The other big component of Ideate Explorer is the way that we can audit our warnings. So as you know, it is very important to manage and audit your Revit warnings. And the reason being is because if you do not take the time to manage your Revit warnings, what can end up happening is you can end up at maybe the simplest level, you can end up with some performance issues in the model. As warnings continue to pile up in your projects, what ends up happening is that it could take a performance hit. And we've found that warnings that deal with calculations like rooms or spaces that are not enclosed, or elements that are attached to but miss their targets, those types of calculation-based warnings tend to slow down your Revit models. Unfortunately, Revit doesn't really give you a nice way to take a look at your warnings. You can certainly go to this dialog box. You can see a screenshot here on your right, and you can take a look at your warnings at a very simple level, right? You can kind of show and get a little bit more information, and in some cases, delete the elements that may be affected by those warnings. But when you come over to the warnings manager that's built into Ideate Explorer, we allow you to categorize your warnings. We allow you to then easily select them, through the Ideate Explorer interface. You can get some information about who created and last updated those elements. This is a really great start. And we use a lot of the Explorer and Revit tools to isolate those elements and have a deeper look at them. And at any point in time, of course, you can query those selections as well. So it really helps you to make an informed decision about how you want to address those warnings. And in certain cases, and we demoed this in our recent warnings webinar, easy ways to deal with, let's say, identical warnings that are, or identical instances, I should say, that are in the same place. So again, Ideate Explorer's got a lot of wonderful tools, and I just wanted to touch upon those before getting into the auditing of the work sets. Okay, so before I get into the Revit demonstration, I'm actually going to even show this to you live in the Revit session here. But how are some of the ways in which we could audit our work sets, even just from a visual standpoint, not even using any sort of products like Ideate Explorer? And one of the ways that you could certainly do this is visually, right? So a lot of offices do create let's say working views and drawing views, and even part of those may be QA QC views. And so I do like to actually have views set up that kind of help me do some basic auditing. And those may be views that are configured to filter out certain types of data. So in this particular example here, I have a couple of 3D views. One of them is kind of the overall picture of the model, and the other one is actually one that's using a section box to kind of cut the model. And then I have certain views that have filters applied to them for the work sets themselves. So under the work sets tab, I'll come in here and turn off all the work sets except the ones that I want to actually see in the particular view. And then you can use the little color by work set feature to actually color your elements based on work sets. While this is nice and pretty and kind of gives you an overall look, and you can kind of come in here and see, okay, maybe I have some mechanical units over here that are clearly on two different work sets when they shouldn't be. This is a very inaccurate picture of your model. And it's also very labor intensive because you really have to kind of go through and scan the model visually to see what may be or may not be on the correct work set. And so as part of your QA QC process, this can take a lot of time, and I find it to be very error prone. But if we use Ideate Explorer, and we can certainly use this in conjunction with these views, or we could say, you know what, I don't even need these views because Ideate Explorer is going to give me some really detailed information about elements that are on work sets. And you can see even here, I've kind of highlighted an example of my shared levels and grids, and I see some levels on that particular work set, but then I also see some mechanical equipment and pipe fittings that clearly should not be on this work set. So even from that kind of auditing perspective, it's a nice way to select those elements and then move them over to another work set. And I don't even need these views as set up here to even help me with that process. I could use any sort of floor plan view or any sort of a 3D view or section view to take a closer look at those elements. But having these types of views are kind of nice. And by the way, when I'm talking about work sets, I'm also really referring to the model-based elements. There are a couple of, I guess we could say, detail-based elements that get work sets that you can move, but things like views, those kinds of elements kind of get their own work sets that we can't move over to another work set. So with that said, I'm going to take a look at the question panel here and see if there's any questions. And then what I will go ahead and do is kind of go into the Revit demo here. And I'm looking at the question panel, and it looks like there are no questions at the moment. And so what I will just go ahead and do is just get into that Revit demo, and this way you can kind of get on with your day. Okay, so let's see here. You should see on my screen the Revit model here, and I'll just take a quick look to ensure that you can, and it looks like you can, so that's good news. And I'm going to demo a couple of mechanical examples, and then I'm also going to demo an architectural example. Now, what I'm going to be showing you here, it doesn't really matter what discipline you're involved with. This process is the same for all disciplines. So again, that's what's really nice about the Ideate software products is they're not discipline specific. Our workflows and our tools work with all disciplines. So that's really a nice advantage. So, and some firms are, kind of all disciplines under one roof, which really makes it even more compelling. So as I mentioned before, you can certainly come in over here in your Revit models and create kind of these workset audit views. And they're really simple to create. Again, I just go into a particular view, and then from there I can turn off all the other worksets with the exception of the one that I want to actually see in here. So let's just take a look at this particular view over here, which is set up for kind of all worksets. So I'll just go ahead and kind of double click on it here and wait for Revit to kind of do its thing over here. So here's kind of my section box, and you can see I already have this model kind of cut into a 3D section. And real quickly, if you wanted to see what I did here, if I go to Visibility Graphics and go to Worksets, you can see here in this particular all worksets, I'm actually seeing everything in this particular view. So that was kind of the goal of this particular view here, just see kind of everything at a high level. And then what I will do is kind of come over to this work sharing display, and I'm going to color it by work set. And then I'm going to wait for Revit to color code the this particular view based on work sets. And this was kind of what I was talking about here earlier. Now I do have several links in this particular model, and so I've kind of grayed those out just so I can focus on the elements that are actually in this Revit model. And as I mentioned before, we can kind of come over here quickly and we can see this is part of the mechanical equipment category. And if I scroll down, I can see that it's part of work set 1, right? And also you can, in this particular mode, you can hover over these elements over here and we can actually get some information about them in this little tooltip. But as I mentioned before, when I select on this other mechanical equipment, and if, again, I can hover over it, doesn't matter. It is part of the mechanical equipment work set. So maybe this is easy to do because this equipment is very large and easy to see, right? But again, it is extremely error prone, and I have to go in here and really start looking closely. If I start zooming in, it makes it quite difficult to start looking at every one of these elements over here to see where there are different color codings, right? So that, to me, can be labor intensive. Let's go ahead and let's go to another view over here. I have one set up for the shared levels and grids, which is actually a very common work set that gets created when you create a Revit, or when you actually enable work sharing in a model. Revit kind of automatically puts things on work set 1 and shared levels and grids, and then people kind of take it from there and create their own work sets. So in this particular view with the shared levels and grids, it is very obvious that there are other items in here that should not be in this work set. Because these are really dedicated just to levels and grids. Unfortunately, you can't see grids right now in a 3D view, which is kind of a bummer in my opinion, but it is kind of the way things are at this moment in time with Revit. So again, I could select some of these elements and easily just move them over to another work set by coming over here and moving it to a work set. But sometimes what happens is, especially with these really, really small elements, I can kind of see something over here. This is where that auditing process kind of fails from a visual standpoint. And so this is kind of where Ideate Explorer can come in and just really save the day. So let's go ahead and show you how you can use Ideate Explorer now to start auditing these work sets. So I'm going to launch Explorer. And by default, if you've never maybe paid attention to this, Ideate Explorer by default on first launch will look at the active view, and we kind of sort things categorically, right, with no sort of filter placed by kind of default, okay? And again, we can see we have some mechanical equipment and pipe fittings in this active view. So again, even without even using any of our sort by, which I'm going to show you in a moment, we can kind of see some elements that should not be showing up in this particular view because of the way it's filtered out, right? But the thing I want to point out to you that makes this really nice is that in a work shared enabled environment, if you're not using work sharing, this is not going to show up over here. But we can take this tree and we can sort it by all sorts of methods, right? I could sort things by level, which may or may not help us in this case. But I could say, you know what, let's just sort this by work set. Okay, and then in this case here, we're seeing view-based work sets and user-created. And user-created are the ones that you're really going to want to focus on. And so let me just go ahead and expand this and show you what I'm talking about. So here's our shared levels and grids work set. And then easily right in here, this is exactly what I was talking about here. These are the elements that I can clearly see that should not be in this particular work set. And again, looking at this visually, I can kind of see a little dot of something over here, but I was not even aware from a visual standpoint that there were items that showed up over here. And if I zoom out more, I don't see anything else. But when I hit escape to change the selection, I can kind of see a dot here. At first, I thought that was some a dirty screen until I kind of saw it, but you can see it kind of disappears on your end. So again, visually, it's really difficult to see. So what's really nice about this is I can easily select all the mechanical equipment because these are, categorically organized, and I can come in over here and just easily come over and move it to a different work set. So in this case, I'm just going to move this over to the mechanical HVAC. And so just like that, when I come in over here, we can see now that those items disappear off the screen. And this is what caught me off guard trying to audit things, manually, is that there are other elements in here that are not easy to detect, and that's because they're too tiny to see on the screen. So now I can select the pipe fittings, and when I come over to the Worksets button over here, or in the the Worksets selection, I can come over here, and I'm just going to move this maybe to plumbing category, plumbing fixtures, or whatever it may be. And so just like that, when I come over here now, shared levels and grids, all I see now are my levels. And that's exactly the goal of this particular view over here. Okay, so that's a little bit about auditing those particular work sets. So that's really nice and handy. Okay, let me see here. A question just appeared, and let me just see what that looks like over here. So I'll just expand that, and I'm going to move on to the next one. Okay, let's see here. All right. Okay. I'll answer. There's one question about Explore in general. And so I will come back and address that. And I hope you guys can see my cursor. I will try to highlight it more, but it should show up on your screen. If you see that little flashing circle, that means I'm trying to point out kind of where my cursor is, because sometimes it can be hard to see on the screen. Okay, so there may be a slight lag, so I will ensure that I slow it down just a tad in terms of the presentation. Thanks for the heads up on that one. Okay, other than that, I don't see any particular questions. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to look at my entire project, okay? And maybe what I'll do for this particular example is I can go back to all work sets here if I want to, or I'll even go back to my 3D view, okay? So there's a couple of ways of doing this. So in this particular one here, I could see my entire model in a 3D mode. And again, I can color this thing by work sets if I want to. Again, it may be really difficult to see every little item in here, especially because they're colored by work set. And again, you don't need to color your model to do your work set auditing, but it's kind of fun to do this in this particular presentation. So again, I'm sorted by the entire project, or I should say I'm displaying the categories and elements for the entire project by work set. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to expand the user created. And so what I'm showing over here, just to kind of give you a heads up, is we're showing you all of the work sets that are in use. So just kind of keep in mind here with Ideate Explorer, we're showing you elements that are actually in use in the Revit model. We're not going to just show you things that are not in use. You can certainly find other elements or views that are actually that exist in the model that may not be in use. So for example, if I come over to the Navigate tab and I expand, let's say, views, I can certainly see views that are not on sheet versus the ones that are on sheet. So we can maybe argue, well, these aren't necessarily in use, although they are views that actually have been created. But generally speaking, we're going to show you the items that are in use. So we may not even be seeing all of the work sets in here that exist in the model. You can see if I just do a side-by-side comparison, we can see how many work sets I have here versus my views for each and every work set. But as we add more elements to other work sets that may not be in use, then they will show up in the Explorer interface, okay? Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of mention that to you guys at first. Okay, so now what I wanna do is I'm gonna expand work set 1 because I have an item here that, and my work set has a name in it that says, you know, all items in work set 1 need to be moved to a work set. Again, that may be a policy of yours or may not be a policy of yours. It just really depends on how every office wants to handle this thing called work set 1. But immediately you could see there are a lot of elements in here that need to still be addressed. And we're not going to address all of these items today because it could take a little while. Like we have 4,387 duct fittings that could take a little while to move over. But let's just pick one category over here because, you know, you would say, hey, I'm going to select all of these elements over here and just move them to the appropriate work set. So as I had these selected over here, I notice in my project browser that they're grayed out, or my properties dialog box, I should say. And there may be a couple of reasons why these are grayed out. So sometimes you'll select them and you can't move them. Now, what I could certainly do here, and it can take a little while, is I can certainly expand these and I can start unchecking items you know, randomly until I can get this thing maybe not to gray out. So what this tells me here as I uncheck this is that there's got to be an item or 2 or 3 or more that may not allow me to just move these over to another work set. And so this could seem extremely frustrating, but remember, this is a limit of Revit, right? There's something about this element or elements that I am unchecking or checking that's still not allowing this to turn black so I can move it to a different work set. Well, I got good news for you. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to select all of these elements again. You can see here I have 66 mitered elbows and taps, and that's confirmed over here. And this is where I'm going to launch Query, because Query is where I can get more granular information about my selection. If you have not gone into Query, you need to go into Query. I love Query, and I cannot live without this feature because I can take my selection of 66 elements or more, it doesn't matter what category they are, and I can really start filtering the selection down by all sorts of parameters, including parameters that you've never seen before in a Revit schedule, like is it pinned, right? Those actually don't exist actually natively in Revit. We had to build this information into Explorer, but you can find out elements that are pinned or not pinned, or elements that have been created and last updated by. That's really, really cool. But for this information, I want to break this down maybe by a few different parameters. And in one given session here, I can do up to 3 parameters for my selection. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to type in level for my first one, and I'm going to look for reference level, and I'm going to say, tell me about the name. In other words, all 66 of these items, tell me what levels they reference. And just by doing that, I see I have 10 of these on level 1, 37 on level 2, and 19 on level 6. All right, so I'm going to highlight that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in like maybe the word system. And maybe what I want to do is maybe for these instances, I want to find out what the system type is for each one of these. It may or may not be handy to you, but I just want to show you how cool this is. And again, if I hold down the control key, I can select that and watch what happens over here. Basically, it shows me the reference levels for each of these elements and what system they belong to, and it also confirms that count. And then the one that I suspect may be the problem here is, are any of these elements actually in a group? And I want to find out if they are, tell me what model group, because these are model-based elements, tell me about the name. And what I'm looking for, because I suspect that there may be a group that's actually preventing me from selecting all 66 of these and moving them to the correct work set. And bingo, that's the problem right there. Of that selection, one of those is actually inside of a group, which is why they gray out. So what I want to do is ignore this one element. It's just one duct. That's all it is that's causing this problem. I'm going to ignore that selection and watch this. I'm going to select this, this, and this. So instead of 66, I'm now going to select 65. And when I do that, look what Ideate Explorer does. It breaks it down by those 65 elements, and take a look at how cool this is. Now I can select this and I can move these over to the, let's just say I'll just move it back to the mechanical HVAC. Okay, and just like that, what's going to happen here in a moment, and there may be a slight delay on your end, but we're going to be moving those over to the correct work set. So what I'll do is I'll cancel my existing selection and maybe do a little refresh. And let me just kind of go back to entire project by work set now, and we can see now all I have left is that one duct. And so what's great is I can select this one duct, and we can see over here, once again, it's in that grayed out work set as expected. Well, now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come over to just a simple feature in Revit, and I'm going to do a selection box around that element. And we can take a more granular look at that element. And so now take a look at this here. I can see that these elements are right within this group right here, right? You can see that array group. And also, just to let you know, I could always come in over here, and in work set 1, I can even find that group and just select it from here if I want to. And so now what I can do is I can actually move that group over to the mechanical HVAC if appropriate. Maybe that group belongs in a different work set. And so just like that, we've actually now addressed that issue, and we can move on to the next items to move over to the other work set. So if you do select elements, I'm going to give you one more brief demo here and then we're done. But if you do select elements and try to move them to a work set and they're grayed out, go to query and take a look to see if they're part of a group. That usually is one of the big issues. It happens to be those groups. And so you saw how I was able to select that and even do a little section box around those elements. And I'll just go ahead and remove that section box, even though I'm going to move on to another model here to finish this out. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to this other model that I have open. I'm going to let Revit do its refresh here. And I'm going to come over to this architectural example here, and you're going to see that Explorer is going to refresh. And I'm going to let Explorer do its refresh here for a moment. So just kind of wait for that to happen. All right, and so I'm going to do one quick example here of work sets, and you can see how Explorer kind of kept it. And the ones that I want to look at are these 3 work sets over here. All right, actually there's 4 of them. And so let me just look at plumbing fixtures real quickly, and immediately in the plumbing fixtures I see there are walls, and maybe my first thought it's a plumbing wall, but that still shouldn't be part of a plumbing fixture work set. And you can see here if I select it and double click on it even, it'll zoom in on that wall. So I can easily select and say, nope, this maybe belongs to work set 1, just as an example. And that will go ahead and kind of take care of that problem. You can see now it's part of work set 1. But what I do want to look at now that I'm actually in work set 1 is I see plumbing fixtures. And there's 35 of them, and these really should be part of the, these really should be part of the plumbing fixtures work set that is over here. So again, I can come in over here and select them, and I see there's an issue here, and I cannot change the work set right here. So I'm going to go to query, and let's just take a look at this real quickly. So what I will do is I may come in here and say, all right, are they part of a model group? All right, so when I look at model group, if so, tell me what the name is. And in this case, I get a not applicable. So that means they are not applicable to this model group. Okay, well, I'll keep that the way it is, but maybe what I want to find out is, are these nested? Because nested families will cause this. Have you ever seen this parameter before in Revit? You probably haven't. It's not a natural parameter. We had to create that. So I'm going to select that. And right here, sure enough, there is a family that has a nested family in it. And one of those plumbing fixtures is showing up in there under a nested family. So what I need to do is actually select these 34. And just like that, I can move these over to the plumbing fixtures. Okay, and then finally, if we want to find kind of that lone family that's causing this issue, let me just kind of come up over here and go back to entire project, and let me go to the plumbing fixtures over here, And again, I'll just select it and I can certainly do a section box around it. And we're just about done here, and that's the problem right there. The issue is that this is a sink that's actually inside of this countertop family, and you cannot just change the work set of that nested element, as you can see. So that was what the holdup was. If you need to, you could certainly change the work set of the countertop, but that's not a plumbing fixture at that point. My personal recommendation is these should be two separate families. I'm not a big fan of nested families for these reasons, especially when they're completely dissimilar, but that's really a personal preference for you. All right, so that's a little bit about auditing the work sets. I'm just about done here. I just have just a couple more slides to show you. So again, you can find us online at ideatesoftware.com. Be sure to check out our help topics. We have a lot of great help topics. We also have links to our support. So if you have any questions for us, we're here to help you out. And so let's just take a quick look at some of the questions here. So apologies if some of you couldn't see my cursor. I had one person that had some issues seeing the cursor. The good news though is that we have this recorded, and we will also post this on our website. So let's see here. There is a great question that comes up, and that is, what is the exact capacity of the tool when it comes to linked models? And currently what the capacity is, we can get some basic linked information about the link itself, but we don't get down into the exact granular nature, I should say, of every element that's inside of a linked model. Part of that has to do with performance issues and also some of the limitations of what we can get at with the API. But I will tell you, if you do have Ideate BIM link, one of the things that you can do is when you do build a link of elements that you want to take out, let's say to Excel, you can include linked elements in that link. So if you need to look at what else is inside of that model, so for example, let's say you are an architect, just as an example, maybe you're linking in an interiors model and you want to schedule out, let's say, casework. You can schedule the casework that's in your project and also from the interiors link. Again, in terms of editing that interiors link, you have to still go back to the source model to make those changes, as we don't open up that model in the background and make changes to it. But that's a great question. But again, we can find some basic linked information by using Explore, and we can also query that information as well. So fantastic question, appreciate that. We do get those questions that come up occasionally. We got a great comment from Jason saying query is his new best friend. When we brought out query, I was like, oh my gosh, this just made Explorer that much more powerful. But thanks, you guys, really appreciate it, and have a lovely day, and I hope you get some good auditing in with your work sets. Take care.